March 18, 1945. Skies over Berlin. 11:47 a.m. The sun breaks through the scattered clouds at an altitude of 8,000 meters. The air is thin, sharp, and deadly. The outside temperature is -42 degrees. Ice crystals form on the windows of the fighter jets. The roar of Daimler-Benz DB605 engines echoes like distant thunder. 4 Messerschmitt Bf 109 G14s streak across the sky in tight formation. Focke-Wulf on the left. 3 more fighters on the right. 7 aircraft in total. 7 metallic predators flying in search of Allied blood. No cockpit do leader, Oberleutnant Klaus Dietrich Sorry, 32 years old, 47 confirmed victories, Iron Cross, first class, hanging around his neck, blue eyes as cold as the thin air around him. He observes, through the Revi C-12D reflector sight, a single American P-51 Mustang in the distance, alone, unprotected, easy prey. Dietrich turns on the radio. His voice is calm, almost bored. Attention, single Mustang, 3 o'clock high. Attention, lone Mustang, 3 o'clock high. The other pilots confirm this. Choppy laughter ripples across the airwaves. One of them, Lieutenant Werner Schmidt, just 23 years old, comments with youthful arrogance, "A gift, a gift." Dietrich presses the throttle. The Messerschmitt banks gently. The formation follows. 7 wolves chasing a lamb. The 20mm MG 151-20 cannons are loaded. 150 rounds per gun, enough to turn any Allied fighter into flaming wreckage. What Dietrich doesn't know, what none of them know, is that the driver of that lone Mustang doesn't have a single bullet in him. Not a single 50 caliber round, not a single chance for conventional defense. His instrument panel shows 8 Browning M2 machine guns, completely empty. The ammunition counter reads 0. Absolute 0. Nothing. Metallic silence where there should have been a thunder of fire. But Lieutenant James Ghost Maddox, 26, face scarred by shrapnel, hands as steady as steel, is not running away. He is hunting. Dietrich pulls the test trigger. The crosshairs glow bright red. Everything works. Everything's ready. He accelerates. The Messerschmitt picks up speed, 600 kilometers per hour, 620, 640. The distance decreases, 2,000 meters, 1,500, 1,200. Maddox looks in the rearview mirror. He sees the 7 dark dots growing. He sees death approaching in perfect formation. His heart doesn't race. His breathing doesn't change. He touches the throttle, pushes forward. The Packard V1657 Merlin engine roars, 1,490 horsepower responding to his command. The Mustang accelerates, but he doesn't run away. He turns, straight into the 7 enemy fighters. Dietrich frowns. This isn't standard. This isn't doctrine. Isolated pilots flee, smart pilots dive, desperate pilots try to reach the clouds. This American comes from the front. Schmidt shouts into the radio, "He's crazy! He's crazy." Maybe it's madness, or maybe it's the most calculated, coldest, most lethal thing any of them have ever faced. 900 meters, 800, 700. Maddox pulls the trigger. Click. Silence. Nothing, but his thumb presses the fire button anyway. Once, twice, 3 times, as if he were shooting, as if 8 Brownings were spewing 3,200 rounds per minute, as if it were real. What the Germans didn't know was that on that day, 8,000 meters above the heart of the dying Reich, they were witnessing the birth of a tactic that would defy all logic of aerial warfare, and that 3 of them would never return to tell the tale. James Maddox wasn't born a pilot, born a mechanic. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1919, son of a metal worker. He grew up with greasy hands, scraped knees from crawling under Ford Model T chassis, and lungs filled with workshop fumes. At 12, he was already rebuilding engines. At 15, he was racing motorcycles in clandestine races in the port's warehouses. When Pearl Harbor burned on December 7, 1941, Maddox was 22 years old and working at the Curtiss Wright plant, assembling aircraft engines. He enlisted the next day. The United States Army Air Force did not want mechanics flying. I wanted pilots, but Maddox was different. He understood machines with an almost spiritual intimacy. He knew when an engine was running 2 degrees hotter. He felt vibrations others ignored. He saw patterns where others saw chaos. At basic training at Luke Field, Arizona, his instructors hated him because he broke the rules. He didn't follow standardized formations. He tested speed limits. He dived beyond the recommended angles. Once, during a simulated combat exercise, he shut down his engine mid-flight to glide silently behind the enemy and surprise him from behind. The instructor, Major Carl Hoffman, a World War I veteran, nearly expelled him, almost, because it worked. Hoffman wrote in the report, "Cadet Maddox displays an alarming disregard for standard operating procedures. He also demonstrates a sharper combat instinct than any pilot I have ever trained. I recommend close supervision and immediate promotion." Maddox was sent to England in January 1944. 357th Fighter Group, based at Leiston, Suffolk, flew P-51B Mustangs, radio code name Ghost 5, Ghost, Phantom. The nickname came after his 3rd mission. Escorting B-17 bombers over France, Maddox became separated from the formation while pursuing a Focke-Wulf fighter. The fight lasted 12 minutes, involving 17 maneuvers. Maddox used fewer than 50 rounds. The other pilots expended hundreds. When the Focke-Wulf went down in flames, Maddox was gone. It disappeared from the radar. It disappeared from the radio. No one saw him come back. But 3 hours later, his Mustang landed smoothly at Leiston. Fuel tanks nearly empty, fuselage intact. Maddox stepped out of the cockpit, lit a cigarette and said simply, "I flew low. I avoided flak." The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, asked, "How low?" Maddox shrugged. 10 meters, maybe 8. Impossible. Suicide. But he was alive. It was the 12th mission that changed everything. September 26, 1944. Escort over Kassel. 24 P-51s, 60 B-17s, partly cloudy skies, heavy flak. Maddox took on 5 Messerschmitts single-handedly. He knocked down 2, damaged a 3rd, but he used up all his ammunition, all 8 Brownings, all 1,800 rounds, empty. There were still 40 minutes to go to the safe zone, and 2 Bf-109s were still hunting him. He could have fled. He should have fled. Doctrine said, out of ammunition, return to base. Preserve the aircraft, preserve the pilot. Maddox did the opposite, turned against the Germans. He pretended to attack. He pressed the empty trigger. He tilted his wings aggressively. He dove as if initiating all-out combat. The 2 enemy pilots, young, nervous, with less than 20 hours of combat experience, panicked. They broke formation. One of them dove so hard it exceeded the Bf-109's terminal velocity. The wings began to vibrate. The structure groaned. He pulled back desperately on the control stick. G-force crushed his body against the seat. Tunnel vision, partial blackout. The fighter lost lift. He went into an inverted tailspin. It fell without a single shot being fired. The 2nd German pilot saw his teammate fall. He panicked even more. He tried to escape. He took a sharp turn. Stall. He lost speed. The engine sputtered. Black smoke. Maddox continued, attacking. He approached. The German, desperate, ejected. 2 fighters destroyed. 0 bullets spent. When Maddox landed, the armorer, Sergeant Mike Torrance, checked the weapons, all empty. He looked at Maddox in disbelief. "Lieutenant, what the hell?" Maddox smiled for the first time in months. "They didn't know I was empty." The news spread, first by the squad, then by the group. He finally rose to command of the 8th Air Force. General William Kepner, commander of the 8th Fighter Command, personally summoned Maddox. "Lieutenant, what you did was insane." "Yes, sir." "It was also brilliant." Silence. Kepner walked to the window. He watched the Mustangs lined up on the runway. "How many times do you think you can repeat that?" Maddox thought. "Any time you need, sir." Kepner turned around. "Then I'll give you the chance." No one imagined that this apparent failure of ammunition carried the seed of a devastating psychological victory. The first deliberate attempt was a disaster. October 12, 1944. Mission over Bremen. Maddox received specific orders to test the empty deception tactic, intentionally empty ammunition early, then use bluff to disrupt enemy formations. The theory was solid. The practice was bloody. Maddox spent half his ammunition destroying a Bf-109. He saved the rest. When he spotted a formation of 4 Focke-Wulf FW-190s, he intentionally emptied his weapons, firing into the void, away from his targets. Then he turned to attack. But these were not novice pilots. They were veterans of JG-1, Jagdgeschwader 1, one of the Luftwaffe's most lethal units, led by Hauptmann Friedrich Lang, 39 victories, Knight's Cross. Lang saw Maddox approaching. He saw the Mustang lean aggressively, but he didn't panic. Observed, he waited. When Maddox fired, squeezing the empty trigger, Lang saw no traces. He didn't see the characteristic tremor of the wings when the Brownings fired. He saw absolutely nothing, and he understood. He has no ammunition. He has no ammunition. Just smile. Turned against Maddox. The other 3 followed. Suddenly, Maddox was prey. 4 FW-190s armed to the teeth, each with 4 20mm MG-151 cannons and 2 792 MG-17 machine guns. Devastating firepower against a completely unarmed Mustang. Maddox dove 700 kilometers per hour, 800. The wings vibrated violently. The altimeter spun like a propeller. 7,000 meters, 6,000, 5,000. The Focke-Wulfs followed. Lang fired. Tracers sliced the air 5 meters to Maddox's right. He rolled, pulled, 6 Gs. Vision blurred, the taste of blood in his mouth. Another shot, this time closer. Impact. The Mustang's left wing shuddered. 2 20mm holes punctured the flap. Shrapnel ricocheted. One sliced through the side of the cockpit, inches from Maddox's face. He pulled the stick back violently. It rose vertically. The Merlin engine roared, 1,490 horsepower pushing 6 tons of metal against gravity. The speed dropped rapidly, 600, 500, 400, 300, Lang anticipated. He continued straight ahead, waiting for Maddox to fall back down. Maddox rolled at the top of the rise. He reversed. He dove again, but in the opposite direction. For a second he gained distance. For a second he breathed. Then he saw it. A storm cloud ahead, dark, dense, dangerous. Maddox didn't hesitate. He dove straight into it. Turbulence shook the Mustang like a leaf in the wind. Lightning lit up the interior of the clouds. Ice formed on the wings. The instruments spun wildly, but the Focke-Wulfs did not follow. Lang was too experienced to take the risk. Maddox flew blind for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. When he emerged from the cloud, he was 200 meters above sea level, alone, lost. It took an hour to find the English Channel. He made an emergency landing at Manston, a coastal recovery base. The Mustang was damaged. Maddox had a deep cut on his forehead. Blood was streaming down his face. The official report said, attempted tactical deception failed against experienced pilots. Pilot nearly shot down. Aircraft damaged. Tactic deemed impractical against Luftwaffe veterans. Colonel Anderson wanted to cancel the whole thing. Maddox, this doesn't work. You almost died. Maddox wiped the blood from his face. It worked against rookies. I just need to adjust it against veterans. Not letting them notice. Anderson shook his head. You have one more chance. One. If you fail again, you go back to standard escort. Maddox waved. But deep in his mind, a seed was growing. The understanding that deception wasn't about pretending to shoot, but about creating the perfect illusion of danger where there was none. The moment of truth arrived 17 days later, October 29th, 1944. Skies over Munich. Altitude 7,200 meters. Visibility 15 kilometers. Temperature -38 degrees. Maddox flew wingman in a squadron of 8 Mustangs. They spotted 12 German fighters, a mix of Bf-109s and FW-190s. Dispersed formation. The fight started chaotically. 20 aircraft intertwined in a deadly dance, tracers tearing through the sky, smoke, fire, screams on the radio. Maddox destroyed a Bf-109 with a 2-second burst, 47 rounds, surgical precision. The German fighter exploded in an orange fireball. He then damaged an FW-190. The engine leaked black oil. The German pilot disengaged, fleeing east. Then the guns fell silent. Empty. Maddox checked. 860 spent bullets. remaining 0. He should have come back. But he saw something. 3 Bf-109s, apparently separated from the main formation, chasing a damaged P-51. It was Lieutenant Bobby Fischer, a rookie pilot, first month of combat, engine smoking, desperately trying to reach Allied territory. The 3 Messerschmitts were within 15 seconds of firing range. Maddox did the math instantly. Distance, 2,400 meters. Relative speed, 120 kilometers per hour difference. Intercept angle, 42 degrees. He pushed the lever. The Mustang accelerated. But this time Maddox didn't just pretend to attack. He created theater. He rolled violently, a classic combat opening move. He dove at the perfect angle of attack, just like pilots would do when preparing to fire. He lined up with the rear Bf-109, ideal firing position. And he did something no pilot would do if he was out of ammunition. He approached very dangerously. 400 meters, 300, 250. The distance where traces are visible, the distance where death is inevitable. The pilot of the rear Bf-109, Lieutenant Hans Kruger, 24, 9 victories, saw the Mustang in the rearview mirror, saw the aggressive approach. He saw the nose of the American fighter aligned perfectly and waited for the fire. Maddox pressed the empty trigger once, 2, 3 times. He shook the Mustang lightly, mimicking the recoil of machine guns. Kruger didn't wait to confirm. It broke violently to the left. 7 instant Gs. The force crushed her body against the seat. Vision darkened at the edges. Leg muscles contracted, fighting the blackout, but he pulled too hard. The Bf-109 lost critical speed, 320 kilometers per hour, 300, 280, stall. The wings lost lift. The nose fell off. Kruger tried to recover. He pushed the stick, he pressed the throttle, but the altitude was insufficient to gain speed before regaining control. The Messerschmitt went into a tailspin. It turned 3 times. Kruger ejected at an altitude of 500 meters. The fighter jet crashed into the ground near a village on the outskirts of Munich. Explosion. 6-meter crater. Debris scattered for 100 meters. First kill, 0 bullets. The other 2 pilots saw. Corporal Erich Bauer and Sergeant Otto Kessler, 19 and 21 years old, 7 and 4 wins respectively. They saw their companion fall. They saw the Mustang approaching. They panicked. Bauer tried to turn on Maddox. Frontal attack. Fatal error. Maddox was a master of aerial geometry. He calculated the closing angle. He simulated aiming. He shook the Mustang's nose as if he were about to fire. Bauer saw the enemy nose pointing directly at him. He saw the distance decreasing. 800 meters, 600, 400. It broke at the last second, but there was no space. Kessler was flying just 40 meters to Bauer's right. The sudden break brought the 2 fighters dangerously close. 20 meters, 15, 10. Kessler shouted into the radio, "Distance! Distance! Distance! Distance!" He rolled desperately. The wingtip of the Bf-109 touched the tail of Bauer's fighter. It just rang, but at 500 kilometers per hour, touching is enough. Kessler's wingtip was broken off. Fiberglass, twisted metal, leaking fuel. The Bf-109 rolled out of control. Kessler fought the controls. He tried to stabilize, but the aerodynamic asymmetry was complete. One side had a wing, the other had a stub. The fighter spun like a top. Kessler Agetu, second kill, 0 bullets. Bauer was alone. He saw 2 fallen companions. He saw the Mustang, relentless, aggressive, deadly, still chasing. And he made the only decision his terrified mind allowed, to escape. He dove. He pushed the Daimler-Benz DB605 engine to its maximum, 2,000 revolutions per minute above the recommended speed. The oil temperature rose. A red warning light flashed on the dashboard. He ignored it. "I just wanted distance." Maddox followed, but not to shoot, to press. He remained 200 meters behind. Deadly distance. A distance where no pilot survives if the pursuer decides to open fire. Bauer looked in the mirror, saw the Mustang stuck. He saw the enemy nose pointed at him, waited for the final burst. She never came, but the psychological terror was enough. Bauer dove even deeper, 5,000 meters. 4,000, 3,000. The speed exceeded 700 kilometers per hour. The Bf-109 began to vibrate, aerodynamic flutter. The wings trembled, the fuselage groaned. 2,000 meters. Bauer tried to pull. The stick was stuck. G-force against excessive speed. He used both hands. He pulled with all his strength. The muscles in his arms tore with the effort. The fighter began to climb, slowly, very slowly. 1,500 meters, 1,000, 800. The nose went up, but the vertical speed was still descending. 600 meters, 400, 300. Bauer ejected. The Bf-109 crashed into open ground. Third death, 0 bullets. Maddox watched the 3 parachutes slowly descend. 3 pilots alive, but 3 fighters destroyed. He checked the instruments. Fuel, enough to go back. Ammunition, 0. Winds, 3. Method, pure deception. When he landed at Leiston, gunsmith Torrance checked the weapons again. Completely empty. He stared at Maddox, mouth agape. "Sir, you did it again." Maddox took off his helmet. Sweaty hair. His face was lined with tension. "I didn't take them down, Torrance." "Who was it?" "Themselves." And in that moment, the air war over Europe learned a lesson that transcended caliber and rate of fire. Fear can be a more lethal weapon than any projectile. The story spread like wildfire. First, by the Allied squadrons, then by intelligence reports. Finally, inevitably, it reached the Germans. The 3 captured pilots were interrogated separately: Kruger, Kessler, Bauer. They all told the same story. A Mustang aggressively pursued them, simulated multiple gunfire, forced evasive maneuvers that led to loss of control. The Allied interrogators asked, "How many times did he fire?" The answer, in all 3 cases, was the same. "I didn't see any traces, but it was about to. I knew it was." That knowledge, that illusory certainty, had been enough. Luftwaffe intelligence received the reports. Initially, they dismissed it as incompetence. 3 pilots destroyed by panic and human error. Shameful but explainable. Then came more reports. November 7, 1944. Maddox forced 2 FW-190s to collide with each other by simulating a non-existent coordinated attack. November 19th. A Bf-109 went into a tailspin trying to evade fire that never came. December 3rd. 3 German fighters abandoned pursuit of damaged bombers when Maddox aggressively positioned himself between them, without firing a single shot. December 14th. 2 Me-262 jets, the world's most advanced fighters, disengaged after Maddox executed a seemingly suicidal attack maneuver. The jet pilots assumed he had some secret weapon. With each mission, the pattern repeated itself. Aggressive approach, perfect positioning, firing simulation, panic response, fatal error. The Germans began to call it Der Geist ohne Kugeln, the ghost without bullets. But few believed that he actually flew unarmed. The alternative explanations seem more logical. Maddox was extraordinarily economical with ammunition, firing bursts so short and accurate they seemed invisible. This belief, this myth, made him even more terrifying. A pilot so precise he killed with invisible bursts. A sniper so lethal that silence preceded death. In January 1945, the Luftwaffe issued a specific directive regarding Maddox. Mustang P-51D, registration 4414151, tail code G4M, piloted by enemy identified as American lieutenant. Tactics, extreme close approach followed by concentrated fire. Countermeasure, do not allow approach to less than 500 meters. Engage only if numerical superiority is at least 3-1. 3 against 1. Ratio usually reserved for aces with more than 20 wins. Maddox officially had 14 conventional kills, but he had 19 forced maneuver eliminations. The phantom eliminations. Sometimes he didn't even need to come closer. January 22, 1945. A formation of 4 Bf-109s spotted Maddox in the distance. The leader ordered immediate withdrawal. They abandoned their assigned patrol area. February 8th, 6 FW-190s called off intercepts of B-24 bombers when Maddox appeared on German ground radar. He had become a spectre, a presence that altered tactical decisions without firing a shot. The psychological impact transcended numbers. Young Luftwaffe pilots, many with less than 30 hours of flying time, entered combat already conditioned by fear. If you see the ghost, run away. If he comes any closer, you're already dead. He doesn't make mistakes, ever. The legends grew. They said Maddox could take down fighter jets with 3-round bursts, that his eyes saw through clouds, that he had a pact with entities beyond comprehension. None of this was true, but the truth was equally stunning. Maddox understood that aerial combat is fundamentally mathematics and psychology, geometry of angles and velocities, psychology of decisions under extreme pressure. He mastered both. He knew exactly what angle of approach generated maximum fear. He knew that distance made enemy pilots believe that a shot was imminent. He knew that maneuvers signaled absolute aggression, and he used this knowledge as a weapon. On March 18, 1945, the day that opened our narrative, Maddox was on his 62nd combat mission. He had 14 conventional victories, 27 eliminations by forced maneuver, 0 bullets wasted in 23 consecutive missions. When he spotted the 7 German fighters led by Klaus Dietrich, he didn't hesitate. Ammunition, 0 since takeoff. Plan, destroy at least 3, using only psychology. He turned straight towards them. Dietrich lives, understood the threat, but he underestimated the method, and this underestimation would cost 3 fighters, 2 emergency ejections, and a devastating blow to the Luftwaffe's already shattered morale in the final days of the war. To understand why Maddox's tactic worked, we need to understand the nature of air warfare in 1945. The Luftwaffe was dying. Not for lack of aircraft, the underground factories were still producing hundreds of fighters a month. Not for lack of pilots. The Reichsluftfahrtministerium was still training young men desperate to fly, but due to lack of experience, fuel and hope, the veteran aces were dead. Hartmann still flew on the Eastern Front, but he was an exception. Marseille had fallen over Africa. Mulders had died in an accident. Galland had been removed due to political conflicts. The ones that remained were boys. 17, 18, 19 years old. 20 hours of training when there should have been 200. First real combat mission when there should have been 50 simulated ones. Against them flew Allied pilots like Maddox. Hundreds of flight hours, dozens of real fights, rigorous, standardized scientific training, and something more important, trust, the confidence of someone who knows that victory is inevitable, that with each passing day superiority increases, that heaven no longer belongs to the enemy. Maddox personified that confidence, but he added something unique, deep machine understanding. He knew that the P-51 Mustang was not superior to the Bf-109 in everything. The Messerschmitt climbed faster. It turned tighter at low speed. It had a better rate of climb below 4,000 meters. But the Mustang had critical advantages: top speed above 6,000 meters, exceptional dive ratio, more responsive controls at high speeds, and range, glorious range, which allowed it to fly deep over Germany, while enemy fighters were hampered by small fuel tanks. Maddox used each of these advantages. Against Dietrich and his 6 fighters, he used the psychology of numbers. 7 against 1 suggested massacre, but Maddox turned this into an enemy disadvantage. When he turned against them, he forced Dietrich to make a decision: retreat and look like a coward, or engage, and assume the lone pilot had a suicidal or genius plan. Dietrich chose to engage. Error, because Maddox wasn't trying to win. I was trying to make the 7 pilots make mistakes. He flew straight into the formation. Dietrich ordered dispersal, a standard maneuver to avoid a head-on collision. The 7 fighters fanned out. Maddox chose one, second from the left, Lieutenant Werner Schmidt, the arrogant young man who had laughed on the radio, aimed straight at him. Schmidt saw the Mustang approaching, 400 meters per second closing speed, 10 seconds to collision, new 8. Schmidt expected to see tracers. 7, 6, still nothing. 5, 4, it should be firing now. 3, why doesn't it shoot? 2, Schmidt broke. He dove violently. Maddox didn't even follow him. It went straight through, chose the next target, Feldwebel Kurt Brandt, 22 years old, 16 hours of combat. Maddox rolled. He positioned himself behind, 200 meters away. Deadly distance. Brandt saw in the mirrors, saw the Mustang stuck, waited for the end. He took a desperate turn. 7Gs, 8. The Bf 109 vibrated. Stall imminent. Maddox followed the curve perfectly, but stayed on the outside, maintaining speed. By the time Brandt had reached 180 degrees, he was exhausted. Sore muscles, blurred vision, and the Mustang was still there, relentless. Brandt went into a complete panic. He dove, pushed the engine beyond its limit. The oil temperature has exceeded the red mark. White smoke leaked from the hood. The engine sputtered, stopped. Brandt tried to restart. He turned the ignition. Once, two, three, nothing. 4,000 meters above sea level, no engine. Planning. He ejected. First elimination. Dietrich lives. He shouted into the radio. Form up. Don't fight alone. Training. Don't fight alone. But it was too late. Maddox had already fragmented the group. Each pilot flew alone. Each made independent decisions based on fear. Maddox chose the third target, Under-Officer Max Fischer, 20 years old, 4th combat mission. He approached from the side. Fischer is alive, tried to turn against Maddox. Defensive attack. Maddox pretended to accept the head-on duel. It turned too. The two fighters were racing towards each other. 600 meters, 400, 300. Fischer bided his time. 200 meters. Now! He pulled the trigger. The 4 MG-151s roared. 20mm shells tore through the air. But Maddox had rolled half a second earlier. The projectiles passed underneath. Fischer, committed to the trajectory, could not adjust. The two fighters passed 20 meters apart. Maddox rolled again. He positioned himself behind. Fischer looked in the mirror, saw the Mustang. He saw death, gave up. He rolled onto his back. Go away. Second elimination. Now there were 5 Germans. Dietrich tried to reorganize, but Maddox was too fast, too unpredictable. He dived. I went up. It rolled. It appeared where it shouldn't be. He disappeared when he was supposed to attack. One of the pilots, Lieutenant Hans Zeiss, lost his cool. He shouted into the radio, "He's everywhere! I can't hit him! He's everywhere! I can't hit him!" Zeiss fired wildly. He used up half the ammunition shooting into the void. Maddox wasn't even close. Another pilot, Feldwebel Otto Richter, tried to escape. It simply turned and flew east. He abandoned the fight. There were 4 left: Dietrich, Schmidt, Zeiss, and Unteroffizier Paul Engel. Maddox chose Zeiss, what was in panic, which had already wasted ammunition uselessly. He approached 100 meters, 80, 60, insane distance, where a collision was as likely as a gunshot. Zeiss saw in the mirrors. He saw the Mustang's nose almost touching its tail. He shouted, "Out, out, 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 out!" It rolled, inverted, pulled. But the G-force was excessive. Blackout. He lost consciousness for 3 seconds. When he woke up, he was in a vertical dive. 3,000 meters above sea level, 2,500. Regained control at 1,800 meters. But terror consumed him. He landed on a makeshift field 10 minutes later. He came out of the cockpit trembling. He vomited. He cried. He never flew a combat mission again. Third elimination, psychological. And that day, over Berlin, at an altitude of 8,000 meters with 0 bullets and 3 enemy fighters destroyed, James Maddox proved that the deadliest weapon of war wasn't caliber or rate of fire. It was certainty. Dietrich landed at Tempelhof 40 minutes later. He left the cockpit. He walked straight to the briefing room. The unit commander, Major Erich Hartmann, not the famous ace, but another with the same name, was waiting for a report. Dietrich, for the first time in 4 years of combat, was unable to speak immediately. Hartmann waited. Finally, Dietrich said, "We lost 3 aircraft. Against how many enemies?" "Break." "1. A squadron?" "No, Herr Mayer, a fighter, a pilot." Silence. "Did he destroy them?" Dietrich shook his head. "No." "Then how?" "He made us destroy ourselves." The war ended 6 weeks later, May 8, 1945. Unconditional surrender. The Luftwaffe ceased to exist. James Maddox returned to Philadelphia in June. received the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Star, 14 victories confirmed by firearms, 31 forced maneuver eliminations, a category created specifically for him. Total 45 wins, making him, technically, a double ace. But the numbers don't tell the full story. They don't count the nights Dietrich woke up sweating, seeing in his nightmares the Mustang approaching without firing. They don't count how many German pilots gave up flying after encountering the Phantom. They don't count how many Allied bombers reached the target because enemy fighters fled when Maddox appeared. They don't count how many lives were saved because he weaponized psychology. Maddox never spoke publicly about the tactic. When asked in a 1978 interview how he managed to take down so many enemies without ammunition, he replied, "I didn't knock anyone down. I just showed them what they already feared. The rest they did on their own." The reporter insisted, "But how did you know it would work?" Maddox lit a cigarette. He looked out the window, and he said something that became legend in aviation circles. Because war is not about who shoots the hardest. It's about who thinks the fastest, feels the least fear, and understands that the enemy is human, and humans make mistakes when they believe death is inevitable. And you made them believe that? No, break. I made them believe it had already happened. Klaus Dietrich survived the war. He became an aeronautical engineer. He worked at the rebuilt Messerschmitt AG in the 1950s. He never talked about the meeting with Maddox. But in his personal files, discovered after his death in 1989, there was a diary entry from March 18, 1945. "Today I faced the most dangerous pilot I have ever seen. He didn't fire a single shot, but 3 of my men fell, not from bullets, from fear. And I realized something terrible, that perhaps the war was already lost, not because our planes were inferior, but because our certainty was dead. And certainty, I realized too late, is a more important fuel than kerosene." Maddox's tactic was never officially adopted. No combat manual recommended flying without ammunition. No instructor taught psychological bluffing. But every fighter pilot who has studied World War II knows the story. Every squadron commander knows that combat is as much mental as mechanical. And every enemy, in every conflict since, has learned the lesson Dietrich learned too late, that the roar of weapons frightens, but the silence of a confident enemy terrifies. They laughed when they saw a lone Mustang. They stopped laughing when they realized that the sound of their laughter was mixed with the echo of their own incompetence. They laughed when they thought I was easy prey. They fell silent when they realized that they were the ones being hunted. They laughed when they saw 1 against 7. They died when they realized that numbers mean nothing against those who turn psychology into physics. The thunder of the Brownings never sounded, but the silence spoke, and 3 fighters fell not from fire, but from fear. And on that day, under the dying sky of the Third Reich, an ancient truth was relearned. That courage doesn't need bullets. That victory does not require violence. That supreme power is not in destroying the enemy, but in making him destroy himself. The thunder spoke through the silence, and the sky never again belonged to those who confused ammunition with supremacy.